Good morning, everybody, and thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. I know this is going to be titled a fireside chat, but given the weather forecast for this weekend, we're not going to start any fires. We're going to do a nice, shady, cool chat. So again, thank you for joining. My name is Mike Florence. I'm a senior account manager for KIS. For those of you that don't know, KIS, we're a premier VAR consultancy servicing the greater Northern California area for all of your IT and professional services needs for the last almost 35 years. So we have a pretty outstanding track record. And joining us is Arctic Wolf, one of our premier partners in the security practice sector here at KIS. And with that said, we have Zach Anderson, Max Nathan, and Brian with Arctic Wolf that will basically run the presentation. We'd like to keep this open. If you have any questions or comments or anything that you would like to have clarity on, please don't wait till the end. Raise your hand and let us know what your questions are, and we'll address those. With that being said, I'm going to hand it off over to either Zach or Max and allow them to get the ball rolling.
Yeah, thanks, Mike. Arctic Wolf, super excited to be here. Thanks, everybody, for joining. I'm just going to give a quick handoff over to Brian Knopp, the security expert who's going to be giving the presentation today. And we do have time dedicated at the end for a Q&A session. So send questions in the chat. If you feel obligated to interrupt Brian, I'm sure his feelings won't be hurt. But we do have time dedicated at the end for some questions. So with that, go ahead, Brian.
Perfect. And I'm going to try to share my screen. Please let me know if there's any issues with that.
Before we're going to share the screen, we're going to do a trivia game.
Oh, you mean we're going to hand out money?
Yes.
Wow, I like that.
Yeah.
So we're gonna, with the help of Mike, he could tell us the rules of how to play and what the prizes are.
Yep. So we're going to have a total of I believe 6 questions throughout the presentation. The first 4, those that answer correctly and first, will each get $25, and the final 2 questions, again, for those who answer correctly and first, will get $50.
That last 2, yeah, the last 2 questions.
Right.
And of course, you punch in your answers into the polling feature, so everybody has a good, easier way to get their answers in.
Yep.
All right, let's start it. Go ahead, Mike, and read our first question.
All right, here we go. Now, this is one that I didn't know earlier, but now I do. What is the fastest recorded speed of an Arctic wolf?
All right, and what are the options?
26, 36, 46, or 56 miles per hour. These are not kilometers.
And you have 10 more seconds to answer those. Go ahead and punch in.
Wow, nobody's gone for 26. Amazing.
All right, and Paul, and we have the correct answer is, it's C, 46. Good job. Good job.
Boy.
All we have a pretty good percentage of people getting that right. All
yeah,
right.
and that tells me that if I have an Arctic wolf chasing me, I'm just going to stop and get it over with.
All right. Next question.
If we can move.
Go ahead.
Well, you have the trivia question answers up in front of the question.
Just close that window. You can close
There
that
we go.
window. Yeah.
What % of cyber incidents root cause is phishing? We're not talking walleye. So the answer is 2%, 10%, 17%, or D, 25%. Wow, look at that.
And you have 10 seconds to answer those questions. All right. And Paul?
All right, so 2 of you out there, each one $25. And just so you know, we utilize a application that monitors responses and it will spit out a report to us later on who of you that answered correctly came in first. So we will basically contact those winners after the webinar.
Yeah, or send a thank you email along with the winners, basically, who won the first questions. And then,
Yep.
So that was the 25, and of course we got 80%. Good job, all. All right, and that is end of our poll. So we can go ahead, Brian.
All right. I don't know. I think maybe some of you were going along with me. Only 25%
Yeah.
started by phishing. That's amazing. I'm sharing my screen now. Please, someone let me know if there's any issues with that coming across. And I am based out of Seattle, Washington, where it is a beautiful 75 degrees out as well, but I'm obligated to tell everyone that it's pouring down rain. We also have inches of snow. Stay away, don't move here. But yeah, so today, the non-fireside talk, and I say this, I'm just so grateful that the air has cleared a bit from what we were getting from Canada. So we will avoid the fireside conversation today and just kind of talk about the security operations and services offered by Arctic Wolf. Now, some of you may not know this. Arctic Wolf, not a camping company. That's one of the trivia questions I've heard before. That's Arctic Fox. Yes, but we are more focused on security operations, and we offer services, not tools. And one of the big ones that we're here to talk about today and focus on is our incident response organization. And so for the first little bit today, that's what we're going to focus on here. Now, traditionally, this is where we've all seen the scary slides around. Pretty much everybody's been impacted by some type of incident response at this time. If you haven't personally, and if your organization hasn't, you know someone who has. And these threats, again, 25% coming from phishing, we heard earlier. It's just such a wide gamut, an asymmetrical battle, if you will, in terms of trying to stay on top of all these things. Now, one of the things traditionally we've noticed with incident response is there were some areas for improvement. Feedback that we heard from others was, for instance, having to prepay for hours and then not use them, rush later to burn those hours. Kind of not a fun scenario. When you're trying to be proactive and help your organization prepare for the worst, you don't want to also be held hostage to try to find a way of using those hours. The other piece that we saw was it was more or less a checkbox, or maybe a financial, legal sort of obligation that's been satisfied. There wasn't a lot of practical planning ahead of time. And so that's where we saw some areas for improvement. We also saw a lot of folks taking two different approaches. One is probably more traditional one, which is you're reactive. You have a bad day. You have to call in on your insurance, assuming that that's an option for you. You're getting some type of referral or reaching out. That's kind of the worst case scenario. Where we thought we could help in another way is to be proactive. And we're going to talk about this, which is called a jumpstart retainer, a way to make sure that, one, you're ready to go, both from an operational perspective, as well as from a financials perspective. So we learned a couple things. First, quick reactivity was key for a lot of folks. So we wanted to make sure that we were going to be able to deliver on a 1-hour SLA, day or night. The other thing was folks wanted to be able to plan ahead of time. They didn't want any back and forth on, well, how much will this be if this happens? So the other thing that we've established is making sure to have a guaranteed rate on what those hours are. The other piece was around trust. So when you're in this circumstance, you also want to be working with people that, you know, one, aren't going to make the situation worse, and two, know what they're doing. So that also seemed pretty critical. And then the final piece, of course, was being prepared for an incident. So Arctic Wolf offers what we're calling a jumpstart retainer, which is where we're going to help you plan ahead of time. We're going to make sure you get that 1-hour guaranteed SLA. And what will that include? It includes a complimentary scoping call. So you've had an incident, we'll kind of talk through the steps later. We're going to make sure, free of charge, that we get an understanding of how to best address and attack this situation. And then from there, there's some other things that need to be taken care of as well. For instance, making sure that if insurance is involved, that this is going to be an improved organization from their perspective. So we want to make sure we're checking those legal and financial boxes as well. So what does our IR planning look like? Well, surprisingly practical. There's several things that folks maybe don't take into consideration in the middle of a circumstance like this. For instance, if the phone numbers that you've documented are tied to your system's VoIP, your organization's VoIP or internal phone numbers, and that's one of the things that's compromised, where you no longer have access to your phone systems or your email, how are you going to reach out and contact those types of people? The folks who are critical to contact in these types of circumstances vary as well. For instance, executive staff, very important to include in the loop on here, is that certain decisions, often from a legal perspective, are going to have to be made. We see in worst case scenarios where organizations haven't planned ahead like this, where perhaps the administrator or team that's working on restoring the organization services don't have, for instance, the CEO's personal cell phone number in order to track them down and loop them into the conversation. So there's a lot of practical aspects. We provide a secure enclave stored offsite so that should there be an incident, the teams involved will have access to this regardless of the status of the organization's internal network. We're going to work out ahead of time what's important to restore and in what order, critical business functions first, followed by nice to haves, et cetera, and make sure that all of that is documented. So what comes behind the retainer, once we've had that documented and put into place, is an organization that joined Arctic Wolf in 2022, but they've been around for quite some time. And in fact, they're highly respected in this organization. Their name before acquisition was Tetra Defense. They're based out of Madison, Wisconsin. And not only do they have a lot of experience in the practical aspects of restoring organizations back to full health, they're also incredibly good at root cause analysis and even doing some of the other dirty work in terms of like ransomware negotiation. In fact, these guys can claim an 87% reduction in ransomware demands, which is pretty impressive. So again, some of those other aspects you might not think of in the middle of an incident like this. So what does this kind of look like from a customer's perspective? Well, God forbid, knock on wood, you experience some type of cyber incident. With that, the plan is in place from the IR plan builder of who to contact and who to reach out to. And that is where we initiate the entire process. One of the great things is first is that initial scoping call where the incident director will be assigned to you. We'll figure out the scope of the situation, who best to assign, make sure that we have the right people involved, and then they start working quickly to restore your organization back to full health. One of the other things that's important here is the scalable nature of the team. For instance, if we can first address your issues remotely, we're going to try to do that. Boots on ground and getting people on planes might be necessary. We can, deal with that as it comes. However, if possible, the quickest way to get you restored is getting you up and quickly from a remote perspective as quickly as possible. And this is another thing that the Tetra team is incredibly good at. So in conclusion here, what the incident response portion of Arctic Wolf Services provides is a well-tuned, very experienced team that's ready to sweep in. We kind of sarcastically call them the Liam Neesons from Taken, if you will, where a specific group of people with a very specific set of skills get looped in with not only just the cybersecurity background and knowledge that you want, but also with a business understanding of what to restore first and why, and also from an insurance and an executive's perspective, how best to loop those folks in. And I think one of the more important things to emphasize here is the detail in their research, getting down to the root point of compromise. Why is that important? Well, if you kind of don't do that right, you can end up in a situation where you think you've restored from an incident, and really that vulnerability or the way that the attacker got in the first place is still exposed and still open. You can find yourself right back in the same circumstances yet again. So this is truly a fully comprehensive response. Now we're going to go to trivia here in just a moment, but I wanted to share with you an example that really outlines, I think, what the big challenge is for our customers in trying to defend against these types of attacks. So here's a post-mortem that Tetra, Arctic Wolf Incident Response, what they did on a customer. They were not an Arctic Wolf customer before this incident occurred for them. And as you can see at the final end there was data exfiltration. But as we step through what happened, first, they and back to that trivia question that started this all off, it started with a customized phishing email that went to that end user. That user unfortunately clicked the link, went to a misdirected website where they were prompted to put in their credentials. They put in their credentials. This allowed the attacker to also access their environment. Now, as soon as they're signed in to their M365 account in step 2 here, what is the first thing that they find? The employee has saved in their inbox step-by-step documentation on how to join the corporate VPN. So of course, the attacker follows those same instructions. Now they have connected to the corporate VPN network. They're inside. This allows them more privileged access to their Azure environment. They start to do the traditional privilege escalation and find that they can spin up virtual machines. And then these last 2 steps here, you see the parts that were financially impacting to this customer were, one, they were spinning up crypto mining VMs and using their cloud resources and essentially billing them for it to generate money for them and export that externally. The second piece was they found every bit of information that they could from inside that customer's environment and started exfiltrating that through anonymous link sharing. So really where Tetra, where incident response at Arctic Wolf gets called in, is at this point when the customer realizes it's too late, something has already gotten out of their environment. I'm going to hand it back for some trivia now, but when we come back, I'm going to pick up from here and we're going to talk about some ways that we can be proactive and really try to, and note that we can't just count on endpoint protection here. How do we defend against these types of attacks? So with that, I'll pass it back to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
All right, thanks. Let me just quickly share my screen. Sorry about that, guys. There you go.
Okay, here we go. So what percent of cyber,
That
Okay.
was not all questions.
I thought so. Thank you, Jane. Which of the below are differentiators of Arctic Wolf's IRJS retainer? A, proactive IR planning and no prepaid bucket of hours. B, guaranteed rate on IR hours. C, 1 hour response time to requests for IR services. Or D, all the above.
All right. And the final answer is D. Good job. We have 91% who answer it correctly. Awesome.
Very good. That's
Yes.
wow.
It's impressive.
And let me just share it just in case people want to know. All right, next one.
What is the cost of Arctic Wolf's IR retainer?
Aha.
Yeah, big part. So A, $5,000. B, $30,000, which sounds fair. C, $40,000, or D, $50,000.
All right, and we're ending the poll. Let me just guess. It's gonna be C. No, that's not right. Sorry about that.
Sounds about right though.
Yes, okay, it's 5,000.
Wow.
Yes, and we got pretty good. Yeah, we got 70% right. It's very interesting that people just also guess other questions. All right, okay. Thank you. Let's get back to you, Brian.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and that was the other thing that we saw was folks having to sometimes pay $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 for a retainer annually. And if things are going well, you never have to use it. and that's ultimately where we'd like to see you be as well, not having to use your incident response retainers. So as I mentioned, just as we started this, or just as we wrapped up there at the end, this data exfiltration and the fact that they were using corporate resources was something that we really have set out from day one to defend. You'll see this in all of our marketing material as end cyber risk. How do you end this? How do you prevent and be proactive at preventing a situation like this? Well, in almost every circumstance that we see, it's always the end user that's opening the door in the first place. In fact, as we've talked to our customers long-term, that ended up being their most frequent request for enhancement. Can you please improve the service by somehow hacking or incepting my users so they stop doing these things? So we did try to come up with a solution for that, and that is our managed security awareness and user training. We'll talk about that in a moment. But really our bread and butter, the thing that Arctic Wolf has been doing for 10 years has been our managed detection and response. And this is where we're proactively monitoring the environment to catch these types of incidents as quickly as possible before they get into a full-blown incident where you're having to engage an incident response organization. And so we're going to talk through a couple of ways that we do this. First is, of course, making sure that we're not only monitoring the local network, so that VPN connection, but also monitoring the Azure and Google workspaces and those environments as well. So we want to make sure that we're not focused only on endpoint, not focused only on network, not focused only on cloud, but a combination of all of those things. When it comes to Active Directory, so many of our customers are in a hybrid mode where they're using local Active Directory as well as replicating to Azure. We want to make sure that we're monitoring all of those. There's also the concept of cloud security posture management. You'll see that abbreviated as CSPM. The idea of cloud security posture management is vulnerability scanning that's far beyond the traditional endpoint scanning. Oh, you have this vulnerable version of Java installed. More than that, where it's what are the configurations of your cloud environments? If a generic user does have access to your environment, can they do privilege escalation themselves to the point that they can spin up machines or become administrators? We need to monitor, one, if someone promotes themselves to administrator. So that's our MDR monitoring piece. But we also want to know if the customer is vulnerable to someone doing that. And that's the vulnerability management piece. So with all of this and the way that our services combine, we have an organization internally that we call Arctic Wolf Labs. Arctic Wolf Labs is our basically taking in data from all of our different customers, as well as external and open source threat feeds, and really trying to understand how best to interpret what's going on. When they break down where we first see the initial point of compromise, it's rather distributed. Depending on where the customer is at in their security journey, oftentimes they assume that monitoring their endpoint is the most important piece. On the other hand, we see folks needing to pay attention to what's happening from a cloud perspective. So when you see these percentages across the board, you see that how important it is for us to make sure that we're monitoring all of these different aspects of the environment, both externally, from an identity perspective, from an applications perspective, local network and firewall perspective, and of course the endpoint. Endpoint is still very important as well. So let's talk through a couple quick examples of how we have been proactive in stopping a customer from ending up in one of those circumstances that we talked about at the start of this chat. For instance, we had one customer where their user apparently had shared their password in some way. Another way that we see this happening is perhaps they use their corporate email to sign up for a food delivery service or something like that. That organization is compromised. That username and password is leaked from that third party. And now those attackers can use that same username and password to try to get into your corporate organization. We're familiar with Uber. One of the ways that they were breached recently was through MFA bombing, where they did have MFA enabled on that account, but the attacker spent so much time spamming the MFA device that the end user eventually got tired and just approved the token on their phone, and then the attacker was into their environment. And in fact, this is what happened at one of our customer sites as well, where they fatigued the user. Again, there you go. It's that end user letting them in through the front door again. They fatigued the user. They got inside. And this is kind of a difficult thing to detect. If they're using a VPN to make sure that they appear to be local, well, how do we detect this? We're not reading every one of those emails that are coming through, but we can notice anomalous activity such as, well, this is the first time we've seen this user sign into this endpoint, and look at this. The next thing they do is they create a new rule that deletes everything from a specific, everything from accounting or everything from IT. Very suspicious activity. Note the timeline here as well, where we're relying not on a single source or a single alert from a single device or a single solution, but rather this accumulation of alerts and data coming from all of these different sources, where our triage team right away is concerned about the activity of this user. Now, most of the time, 99.99% of the time, why our customers like us is noise suppression. We're a very quiet service. We're not simply just going to forward this alert to the end user and also fatigue your IT department with these alerts. That's not helpful at all. 99% of the time, we are suppressing this and saying, you know what, it was just a user who was doing something normal. It just looked funny to the sensors. But in this case, this was concerning enough to us to reach out, talk to the customer about exactly what was going on. And I'm going to point out another critical piece of the service here. We have two functional arms at play here. First is the Arctic Wolf triage team. You see that called out. The triage team, 24/7, 365, always on these types of alerts, figuring out the best way to triage them. Now, from there, once they've addressed the issue as quickly as possible, figured out how best to contain or isolate the issue and work with you on that, we anticipate there's always going to be follow-up. And this can kind of be a little confusing as folks use the word incident response, because was this an incident? It certainly was. Did Arctic Wolf respond? Yes, we helped them identify exactly what was going on, who was implicated. And then in the follow-up after the fact, the named resources, this concierge security team worked with them to say, okay, what other things were they up to while they were inside of the environment? Did they contact other vendors, etc.? So the point here is that not only are we providing the D in detection for MDR, we're also providing the response, the R, and making sure that you're reacting in the way that's appropriate. Now, another thing that we noticed, it's those end users. Keeps coming back to those end users. And I mentioned this before, that became the biggest request from our customers was, it doesn't seem to be working. We're making our users do this thing at the end of the year. It takes them a couple hours. It's the same videos they saw last year. As we surveyed a lot of our customers, we found homebrewed solutions. We found folks using YouTube playlists, et cetera, and decided that there really was a better way to participate there. And so I hope at this point, you're starting to see the way that our services can be deployed. Now, a critical thing to point out here, they are independent. So if you are only interested in that $5,000 incident jumpstart retainer, and that's just where you want to start with Arctic Wolf, that's perfect. You can stand alone just inside of that. Or if you do have a need, as I mentioned before, for end user cyber awareness training, you see that called out there as managed security awareness. That is also a standalone solution that we can provide for you. But really, we found that there was a lot of power in combining these different solutions, because what we see from a detections perspective, the way that your users are being attacked, do we see a lot of MFA fatigue? Do we see that kind of bombing attacking your users? We can use that to inform the training curriculum that's going out to your end users to make sure that that is what they're being hardened against. And that is not done, again, through AI or ChatGPT or anything like that. Rather, it's that concierge security team. It's the same named resources working with you day in and day out. Now, the last one, I'm just going to touch on this really briefly. What ended up happening was vulnerability management ended up being a gap there. End users would come to us and say, look, I went and downloaded an open source tool, Nessus Scan or something like that. I just got my output as 40,000 items long. Can you help me with the prioritization piece of that? And again, machine learning is awesome. AI is cool, but what we found was a need for human interaction to help talk through those things, as well as for help with the maintenance side. So what our vulnerability management service, the last service that we offer here, we provide all of the care and feeding needed to maintain internal, external, and endpoint scanners, but also, of course, making sure we're looking at your cloud posture as well and making sure that your settings within AWS and within Azure are secure. But more importantly, we're not going to give you a bunch of data on how awesome our machine learning is. Instead, we're going to talk about the fact that you're paired up again with that concierge team with those named resources. So you and your team will have a dashboard to see all the assets and the risk that they pose in your environment, but that's going to be informed with discussions and conversation with your concierge team. So finally, I just wanted to talk through one more example. The last two examples that I talked to were really heavily cloud-based. All of the detections relied only on our cloud type sensors. And so I wanted to talk through an on-premises example because we have a lot of customers still on premises. And last year was crazy for Exchange with all of the vulnerabilities that came out. So one of the things to note about Arctic Wolf and starting our MDR service, our Managed Detection and Response service, we can get that up and running in 30 days. We can go a little faster if you need to go, but really we're so streamlined in the way that we onboard customers now. We have a lot of interview type questions around what are the critical business applications in your environment? And if we see something concerning Saturday at 2 a.m., is it okay for us to automatically contain that? Or do you need us to call and get authorization from you first? And of course, that's not going to be true for everything. That might be true for these business critical applications, but maybe these types of users or this type of kiosk machine, go ahead, Arctic Wolf, contain that automatically and let me deal with that on Monday. So we establish and collect all of that information during the onboarding process. So here, if you'll note the timelines, around 7 p.m. Saturday night, what are we all doing around 7:30? Not usually reading logs, but the Arctic Wolf concierge, or I'm sorry, the Arctic Wolf SOC teams are there. And we notice a couple of things. First, we're seeing some interesting PowerShell commands running on an Exchange server that we haven't seen before. And we're also noticing that it's communicating with a known command and control server in Finland. So these are two big red flags for us. In a normal circumstance, this would be enough for our triage teams to automatically contain this endpoint and say, you know what, whatever EDR is running here can't quite catch what's happening from this perspective. So we're going to manually put a containment in. But we had specific instructions from this user not to do that for this specific Exchange server. They were like, nope, I need a phone call first. So we spent some time getting a hold of that user saying, all right, we need permission from you to kind of figure out what we're doing from here. And note that we contacted that user with what happened, why it happened, how best to protect against it, and made sure that that customer was in a satisfied state. And please note the timelines here, that on a Saturday night before 9 p.m., we had that all buttoned up. And we're able to get it to a state where the customer was happy to resume again on Monday. So on Monday, this is again where the concierge team kicks in. These are folks that have been helping this customer with their security journey. They've been meeting with them regularly. They understand their users and their environment. They start stepping through exactly what occurred, made sure that, yes, the cleanup was appropriate, and then started to harden that environment. Again, note that we're not deploying new tools. We're not selling new equipment here, but rather we're going to configure what's already deployed to be more secure. And I think one of the main reasons I'm bringing this up is we started this conversation talking about Arctic Wolf incident response, which is, this goes to the point that we now need to negotiate ransomware payments. We need to, have boots on ground, re-imaging a lot of machines. Yes, Arctic Wolf incident response is ready to parachute in and help you in those circumstances, but we also offer a proactive service, Managed Detection and Response, that's meant more to help you not get to the point that you ever need the Arctic Wolf incident response. So I will close with these two things, which is first, note also as you're having to deal with insurance and as you're having to deal with compliance, when they start asking questions like, do you have MFA deployed? Well, obviously Arctic Wolf doesn't sell MFA solutions. We're not going to give you an MFA solution, but we are going to help with the requirements when they say, and who's monitoring what's happening on a constant basis from that MFA solution. When we participate with our 4 services, whether it's end user training, incident response, help with vulnerability management, or help with monitoring their environment, those 4 services really help paint a comprehensive picture that insurance organizations and others are starting to require. We see this especially in high compliance environments as well. So that's all I had from that perspective. I think we have more trivia coming. I also want to be aware if there's any questions in Q&A, so I'll be checking on that as well. Please do throw some more in if there's something that I glossed over that you'd like me to go into more detail. But with that, I think I'll hand it back because I think we have some more trivia questions coming.
We certainly do. And here they come. I feel it.
Yep. Just a second. can get my buttons up. Okay, here we go.
These darn buttons.
Yes.
So we've done this one. Here we go. And this one is for $50. What are the key attributes of Arctic Wolf's Security Operations Cloud? And the options are A, vendor neutral open architecture. Very important. B, unlimited ingestion. C, 24/7 concierge delivery model, or D, all the above.
All right. And D, all the above.
Okay,
Good job. Yes, we
All
got
right.
82% in.
very impressive. All right,
Next
here
one.
we go. The final question, again for $50. What does Arctic Wolf Networks have in common with Arctic Wolves? And the answers. A, we both run in a pack. Well, not me so much. B, howling is important. C, apex predator, industry leader, or D, all the above.
And the answer is D.
D, all the above.
All right. Thank you for sharing.
Hey.
Yes.
Congratulations. Thanks for playing.
Mhm.
And- hang on, Jane. So one thing that we might talk a little bit more about is insurance. I know insurance is an issue for a lot of people on the call today, both in obtaining insurance and then being able to pay the premiums. Arctic Wolf does offer a program by way of one of their select insurance companies that will help you hopefully reduce that insurance premium paying. And if that's something that is important to you, we'd love to talk to you about that. So with that, are there any other questions?
And there's also one more thing I could share on that topic as well. There's also a operations warranty. As far as I know, and I'll try to share this out here quickly. As far as I know, we're the only ones putting our money where our mouth is when it comes to backing this up. So you'll see that when you have, for instance, the end user training and have our detection and monitoring, we can actually qualify you for a warranty as well, which will pay out again, God forbid that you have an incident and have to engage Arctic Wolf incident response or anyone else. This warranty is not tied to Arctic Wolf incident response. It can go where it needs to go. But that's also yet another benefit that just comes along with the service. So I hope that you've noticed from the presentation today that we have worked very hard to stay vendor neutral. The endpoints that endpoint protection solutions, firewall solutions, cloud solutions that you've deployed are the right ones for you. So we just want to meet you there and start monitoring those. And then with that, we want to bring as much goodness as we can from adding on things, for instance, the security operations warranty you see here. So again, thanks for letting me add that on there.
Very good. Very good. And Brian, one more thing to add. You mentioned that Arctic Wolf is not a camping equipment supplier, but you are involved in outdoor activities by way of sponsoring winning motorsports teams. The Red Bull F1 team is sponsored by Arctic Wolf, as well as Meyer Shank Racing, both under IndyCar and IMSA programs. And for me, being a motorhead, that excites me. So good going.
It's a lot of fun, and man, who could have predicted getting to be on that Red Bull car, right?
Really?
Yeah, it really has worked out amazing for us just to be right there on the nose cone. I know I watch every race just to see if I can catch it in the camera. Now, the one thing I don't have is my my big jacket or jersey.
Next time.
And yeah, we don't publicly disclose our customers. We'll put a few kind folks on our website that agree, but as you can imagine, a lot of folks don't want to disclose who's monitoring their environment behind the scenes. But Red Bull is one that we are actually able to talk about. So it's very exciting.
Cool. So any other questions that came in?
We had received a couple via direct message, so, but I just wanted to give everybody a chance. Before we dive into those. Ashley, did you have one you got?
Yeah, I was gonna interrupt you for a second. Sorry. Yeah, I was just wondering, Brian, if you could touch on Arctic Wolf Labs a little bit. I saw that at the end on that last slide.
Yep, it's a good call out there, Ashley. So Arctic Wolf Labs, for those who don't know, is an internal organization at Arctic Wolf. It's where we have researchers who are actually doing an analysis. So we have malware labs and the triage teams who are constantly on the front lines being exposed to what's happening. You start thinking about, we have over 4,000 customers at this point, right? And so when we start to detect something anomalous or new that maybe is novel and hasn't been observed before, the ability to do some interesting research there is one, fun, but two, once we understand that, we can write detections for it. And as we've written that for one customer, more or less immediately, the way our platform works, any other customer that's seeing that same activity, we're going to alert on that as well. So when you start to think of, well, it was a while ago, but Log4j and Log4Shell, when that started to unroll, we had our threat research teams at Arctic Wolf Labs who were sitting in on the conference calls, who were observing in real time what the proof of concepts look like and how does that work and what might that look like. And they start, they use a silly name, the precogs. The precogs start trying to write detections to determine, you know, what might occur there. And then we start to see it unfold in real life. Now, the other piece is vulnerability management. How do we know that our customers may or may not be impacted by this? It wasn't something that folks had thought to scan for before. So another group within our Arctic Wolf Labs wrote an internal scan tool that they basically started to push out to customers. It didn't require interaction on the customer's piece. Rather, our operations team staged it, began sweeping customers' networks to see who was vulnerable to this. For those who lived through that at the end of last year, it was a lot of back and forth from vendors as patches were released and then some were retracted and new patches were released. And so there was this constant pendulum swing over several months as folks tried to really dial in how best to address that. At Arctic Wolf Labs, each one of those changes that occurred, we wrote new detections. We updated the platform proactively for our customers. Our customers never had to do any detection updates or pattern updates or anything like that. We took care of all of that for them and then proactively reached out to them if we saw something that was concerning while they were waiting for vendor patches. So Arctic Wolf Labs, to be clear, is not a SKU. It's not something you subscribe to. It's not an additional service. Rather, it's baked into every service that we provide. So from our managed detection and response, where they're getting their detections from, that's being fed internally from our Arctic Wolf Labs team. When it comes to vulnerability management and the rest of the things we've talked about, that's also coming from them as well. So yeah, something we're very proud of. And if it's something that you're interested in, we do have a couple webinars on that topic available on our website as well.
Yeah, I can include that in our thank you email.
Awesome.
Yeah. All right, is there any other questions? Zach, you told us that we have some that chatted you. How about you raise them up to Brian? So everybody might have the same question we can share with.
Yeah, there's a two-part question related to our services, multiple solutions. Obviously, Brian, you gave an overview of our comprehensive security operations approach, which includes multiple solutions. Can you provide some clarity on whether or not these solutions are available individually, a la carte, including the IR retainer? And then can you shed a little bit of light on our licensing model, how we build cost into these solutions?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me bring up this one here again, just so we can have something to look at as we're talking through this. Let's see. Perfect. So yes, again, the four services that we offer: managed detection and response. That's the one we've been offering for about 10 years now. Each one of these can be a la carte. They can be started up separately. So this could mean that a customer just wants to start with detection or just wants to start with our Jumpstart retainer, where they say, you know what, I just want to get that piece going, and maybe that's all they do. or you can start adding on the services as they build out. One thing to note, though, is focusing, for instance, on managed detection and response. When you start the process of managed detection and response, you get onboarded, we start monitoring your environment. You are assigned those concierge team members who you get to know by name. They start what we call a security journey. They have a series of hardening steps that they can take, and this will be on your cadence. If you say, I can only do this biannually, I'm very, very busy. Okay, we understand that. If this is something you want to tackle aggressively, you want like monthly, we're going to do something every month, we can meet you there as well. What does that mean again, the security journey? Well, what we have learned is helping customers do things, for instance, looking at their Active Directory schema, looking at what is whitelisted in their EDR solutions, looking at the various firewall configurations that they have deployed, taking a moment and just examining that and making sure that those are the way that they should be and they're following best practices, over time can harden the customer. Now, we're not doing this completely out of altruism. The more that our customers go down the security journey, frankly, the more secure and quiet and secure the customers themselves become. So we have this formalized process that is really adaptive, meaning, let's say that you're 3 months down this journey, you think you're trying to meet, for instance, a specific NIST compliance or something like that. You're on your track to that, and all of a sudden something happens. You do an acquisition or a merger, or you pivot to a new EDR solution. That's okay. And during that period, concierge team, they're going to pivot. They're going to have this is a new EDR. Okay, we have best practices around that too. Or you're deploying a new firewall schema. Okay, we have best practices around that too, and can match that with you. Now, why am I pointing this out? Is that if you then decide that you want to add our vulnerability management service, when you do that, it's the same concierge team members. It's the same folks you've been working with this whole time. So now they and you have access to more tools from a vulnerability perspective, and they can help inform you in terms of, okay, these are your critical assets, these are your test dev assets, these are your end user assets. The scanner's saying all these different things, there's 10 out of 10 and everything's glowing red, and those might look really important, but the CFO's endpoint has a 4 out of 10, and we've actually seen a couple of our other customers exploited by this. And this we think is actually more real. That type of human conversation, that type of human interaction comes, again, our marketing term is concierge delivery model, but it's because you're working with those same people time after time. Now, again, back to the question of could this be independent? Sure. They could stay with managed detection and response and just stick with that the entire time, or only use our end user training. Those can be independent. But we also want to make sure you understand that if you have multiple services, not only do some of the other goodnesses like the warranty kick in, but you're also working with that same group of people. Was there a second part to that question that I missed? Or was there? Yeah.
The licensing model, I believe.
Yeah, that's the big one. Yeah. Yeah, that's the biggest one. And part of the trivia question around ingestion. Note that we do not charge per gigabyte, per device, per pick a metric, right? What we do charge by are the number of users in your environment, the number of servers. And those can be kind of soft metrics, but what we like about that is, for instance, when we look at our managed detection and response service, we did not want our customers getting into a place where, as I talked about earlier at this halfway point, we want to detect everything in the environment. We want your wireless access point logs. We want your DNS logs. We want your Active Directory logs. Having access to more disparate log sources allows us to correlate in a really advanced way. So the various log sources, and the more of those that we can get, we're kind of the cookie monster of log sources. The more secure we can make you, and it also gives us greater access to data to compare against. So to fight against that, we do not have a licensing model that goes into things like, well, how much for my DNS logs and how much for my DHCP logs and the rest of that. Instead, we just stick to those static numbers of number of users, number of employees, and you will have unlimited log ingestion from there. There's also not any metrics around how many incidents or how many tickets or how many reports or how many scans or how many endpoints will you, there's none of those asterisks all over the place. give us all the data you can get. If we can see it, we can report on it, and we're going to let you know what's happening. We're not going to start messing around with licensing things of, well, we've told you 10 times today about this issue. We're not going to tell you 11. That's probably a bad example, by the way, is because if we're contacting you 11 times in a day, there's something really wrong going on. And by the way, that's true of our other licensing as well. So you heard what our incident response was to get you in. Just you can either not do a retainer. If you don't do a retainer and you need help, yes, contact these folks. They'll loop you into the Arctic Wolf, and we'll get the incident response going. So that will just be an hourly basis. When it comes to the end user training, we just charge you on the number of users that are being trained. So pretty straightforward. Manage risk, our vulnerability management service. We've heard horror stories of, how many devices do you have? Well, I don't know. I need a scanning tool to tell me how many devices I have. Well, you have to tell me how many devices you have for me to give you a license. Well, that's not how we do things. We're just going to give you the scanners and find what we can find on the network. The way we license is by the number of users and servers you expect to be there. That's usually a known number, and we're going to find a lot of things besides that. And then the more complicated one would be managed detection and response, because we're going to add a couple more things to that, like how long do you want us to retain those unlimited logs? See, now there's a more interesting way of looking at that metric. Well, we think 12 months, 13 months is pretty normal in average, but we have some customers that ask us to keep it for 10 years, which is crazy, but we'll do it. So yeah, that's pretty much it. We try to keep it as straightforward and predictable as possible. We don't want you in a situation where 3 months from now, you stand up a new MFA solution and we're having to requote a bunch of things. That doesn't work for anybody. Did I miss anything there, Zach? I think that was it.
No, that was fantastic. And of course, we'll be available for facilitating follow-ups, quick conversations. If anyone has one-off questions, the KIS and Arctic Wolf teams are always more than happy to dedicate our time to answering those and shedding some more light on any of these solutions. But that was wonderful, Brian. A big round of applause. I know we played that round of applause sound effect a couple of times. I feel like, I don't know if James, you have that ready, but I feel like he just...
Yeah. I need to share my screen, but there you go. Thank you.
Good job, Brian.
Thank you.
All right. So if anyone else has last questions, please email us at contact@kiscc.com or at sales@kiscc.com. And of course, I'm going to send out a thank you email with a list of winners and resources on the training that you mentioned. And of course, maybe we can include a list of the price breakdown that you also talked about it today. All right. Again, thank you, Brian, Mike, Zach, and everybody else for coming this morning or afternoon for whoever, wherever you are. Have a nice day.
Yeah, thank you all for coming, and have a great 4th of July weekend. Stay safe.
You too.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.